There is a version of you that nobody knows, not because you hide it with effort, but because it only appears when there are no witnesses, when there is no judgment, when there are no social consequences whatsoever. And it's exactly that version that this test is going to expose. You have 10 seconds before we begin. Use them to decide whether you really want to know what you're about to discover about yourself. Level 1. You're in an empty parking lot. As you open your car door, you lightly hit the vehicle next to you and leave a visible scratch. There are no cameras. No one is nearby. Nobody saw. What do? Don't answer what you should do. Answer what your body already decided before you finished reading that sentence. If your first reaction was to look for paper to leave a note, your social regulation system is active even in the absence of an audience. You don't act out of fear of consequences. You act because you internalized an identity that needs to stay coherent, even when nobody is checking. But if your first thought was to look around and confirm there were no witnesses, and only then consider what to do, the order reveals everything. You didn't consult your character, you consulted the risk. Level 2. Now the scenario shifts in scale. You discover by accident that the company where you work committed a serious financial irregularity. Nothing illegal that directly implicates you, but something that, if reported, would cause real damage to people you don't know and will probably never meet. Reporting has a cost: exposure, discomfort, possible indirect retaliation. Staying quiet has no cost at all. Absolutely nobody will ever know that you knew. What do? The test isn't in the choice itself, it's in the speed at which you arrived at it. If the answer came immediately and clearly, you operate by values that don't depend on an audience. If you needed to calculate, weigh, build a justification for whichever direction you chose, then your morality is situational. It exists when it's convenient and disappears when the cost appears. Also notice what happened while you were thinking. Did you consider what the people close to you would think if they found out about your decision? Did you imagine how you'd feel telling someone about it? If so, you didn't make that decision alone. You brought an imaginary audience into the process, and that means that even in the absence of real witnesses, you still need an internal audience to function. Most people live in that second group and never admit it, not even to themselves. Level 3. Now I'm going to remove any possibility of rationalization. Imagine there's a technology capable of recording every thought you had in the last 24 hours. Not the actions, not the words, the thoughts, the silent judgments about the people around you, the fantasies you would never verbalize, the moments when you wanted something that completely contradicts the image you project of yourself. That recording is going to be shown to the 3 people whose opinion matters most to you. How do you feel right now? There's no option here. There's only what's actually happening inside you at this moment. And if what you're feeling is panic, it's because there is a real distance between who you are when nobody is watching and who you intend to be when everyone is. That distance isn't moral weakness. It's the exact measure of how much your identity depends on an audience to exist. And that is far more revealing than anything you've ever said about yourself out loud. Notice what you tried to do while imagining the scenario. Most people start editing mentally before I finish describing the situation. They start selecting which thoughts would be shown, as if it were possible to negotiate with a thought experiment. That automatic editing is your image management system operating in real time. Even in a fictional situation where there's no one to impress. That says a great deal about how much you live in constant performance mode, even when you believe you're being authentic. Behavioral psychology calls what you just felt a private integrity gap. It's the space between the public self, the version calibrated for social consumption, and the private self, the version that operates without a filter when the audience leaves. Research in moral neuroscience shows that this space exists in virtually every human being. The question is never whether it exists. The question is how large it is. Individuals with a small gap are those whose behavior changes minimally in the absence of witnesses. They aren't necessarily better people. They are more integrated people. What they think, what they say, and what they do form a coherent system that doesn't depend on an audience to hold together. They don't need to remember which version they showed to which person, because there is only one version. Individuals with a large gap live in constant management. Every social context requires a different calibration. Every relationship receives an edited version. Over time, that maintenance effort consumes energy that should go elsewhere. And the person begins to feel a deep fatigue they can't name because they never admitted the cause. An exhaustion that doesn't come from what they do, but from what they sustain. What the empty parking lot reveals isn't whether you're honest or dishonest. It reveals whether your moral compass needs an audience to function. And most people running this test in silence discover they need one more than they'd like to admit. Because the audience isn't only external. Over time, it becomes internal. You start monitoring yourself even when alone, anticipating the judgment of people who aren't even present. You act one way at home, another at work, another with family, another with strangers. And at some point, you stop knowing which of those versions is actually you. There is a word for this in social psychology: identity fragmentation. It isn't a disorder. It's the natural result of years managing different versions of yourself for different audiences, without ever stopping to ask which one is genuine. The fragmentation doesn't hurt in an acute way. It produces a constant feeling that something is slightly off, without you being able to name what. A background restlessness you attribute to work, to the relationship, to a phase of life. You rarely attribute it to what it actually is, the cost of never having been whole in front of anyone. Now look at the people around you through that filter. The colleague who is impeccable in meetings but acts differently when the boss isn't there. The friend who defends values in public and ignores them in private. The partner who says one thing and does another when they believe you're not paying attention. You already identified someone, maybe more than one person. And you probably felt for a second a sense of superiority for having noticed. But that feeling is exactly the mechanism you should be examining, because identifying the gap in others is far easier than looking at your own. It's an automatic defense reflex. While you analyze the other person, you don't have to analyze yourself, but there is something this exercise carries that is much harder to process. It's that the people around you are running the exact same exercise. They too observe the difference between what you say and what you do when you think they're not watching. They too have a theory about who you really are behind the version you present. And that theory is probably closer to the truth than you would be comfortable admitting. The question that remains isn't what you do when nobody is watching. It's what you would do if you found out that someone always was. See you in the next analysis.